So if there's one academic field that really proves theory and reality are in this constant high-stakes battle, I think it's bioethics.
Absolutely.
We're talking about genuinely life-altering decisions here. Who gets a scarce organ? Where's the moral line for genetic engineering?
Right.
The complexities around end-of-life choices.
Yeah.
Just agonizing stuff.
Right.
These aren't just abstract thought experiments. They're unavoidable, immediate, and frankly, really challenging questions for all of us.
And that's exactly why we're here today. Our mission really is to give you a solid handle on this field. We're going to dive into the foundational roadmap. That's Chapter 1 on moral reasoning.
Okay.
Because it gives you the vocabulary, the core principles, and importantly, the critical thinking tools you need to get past just gut reactions and into, well, reasoned deliberation.
So building the groundwork.
Exactly, building the groundwork. So when you encounter these tough conflicts in medicine or technology, you actually have the clarity to understand why people are arguing, what's really at stake.
Okay, right. Let's unpack that foundation then. We often throw around three words almost interchangeably: morality, ethics, and bioethics.
Yeah.
But they're distinct, aren't they? We need to know the difference.
We really do.
So morality, that's just the set of beliefs a person holds about right and wrong actions, good or bad character. Basically what you feel you ought to do.
Right, your internal compass, so to speak.
Yeah.
And ethics, or moral philosophy, that's the study of morality. It's the philosophical toolkit, critical reasoning, logical arguments that we use to really examine those beliefs.
Oh, okay.
It asks the big question, how ought we to live? And here's a critical distinction. We're not really interested in just describing what people actually believe or do. That's descriptive ethics, more like sociology.
Like taking a poll.
Exactly. We're focused on what we should do, the normative question.
Okay, so if ethics is this reasoned investigation, it breaks down into what, three main categories?
That's right, three branches. First, you've got normative ethics. This is where we're searching for and trying to justify the moral standards, the principles, the rules themselves.
Like figuring out why autonomy matters.
Precisely, establishing that principle.
Mm-hmm.
Then second, there's metaethics. This goes even deeper. It studies the meaning and justification of our most basic moral beliefs.
So asking things like, what does right even mean?
Exactly. What are we actually talking about when we use these words? And finally, the one we're really focusing on today, applied ethics, and specifically bioethics.
Right.
This is where we take all those norms and principles and actually apply them to resolve practical, real-world issues, in healthcare, medical science, technology. It's where the rubber meets the road.
So morality gives us standards, norms. What makes a moral standard feel, heavier or more serious than, say, rules of etiquette or even laws?
Good question. It really comes down to about 4 key features that make moral norms stand out. The first one is normative dominance, sometimes called overridingness. Basically, moral norms usually take precedence over other kinds of norms.
So morality trumps law.
Often, yes. If a law mandates something truly brutal, moral principles like justice or nonmalefcence would suggest that law is illegitimate. Morality should guide us there.
Okay, makes sense. What's second?
Second is universality. This is really just about consistency. If you judge an action as wrong for person A in a certain situation, it has to be wrong for anyone else in a relevantly similar situation.
You can't just make exceptions for your friends.
Exactly. Then number 3 is impartiality. This means everyone's interests should count the same. We can't discriminate based on irrelevant things like skin color or religion or how much money someone has.
But wait, impartiality doesn't mean treating everyone identically all the time, does it?
No, that's a crucial nuance. It means treating people identically unless there's a morally relevant difference. So, back to the hospital example. If you have 2 patients needing the last ICU bed, maybe age or likelihood of recovery could be morally relevant differences, but, who their favorite singer is, definitely not relevant.
Got it. And the last one?
The fourth feature is reasonableness. Moral judgments aren't just gut feelings or personal preferences. They need to be backed by careful reflection, by the best reasons we can find.
So you can't just say gene therapy feels wrong and leave it at that.
Nope. That's stating a taste, not making a moral argument. You need reasons.
That's a really clear breakdown. Now, before we jump into the main principles, the source also distinguishes within moral norms themselves, talking about moral obligations versus moral values. Is it about the action or the person?
Right. Obligations are about conduct, what we ought or ought not to do. This leads to judging actions as right or wrong.
Duty, basically.
Yeah, duty, conduct. Values, on the other hand, concern things we judge as morally good or bad, like a person's character, their intentions, or motives. And this distinction helps us understand supererogatory actions. That's a bit of jargon, but it means actions that are above and beyond the call of duty, like giving all your money to help the poor. That's incredibly praiseworthy. A good thing reflecting good values, maybe.
Yeah.
But it's not generally considered morally required. You wouldn't be judged morally wrong for, say, keeping your retirement savings.
Okay, that makes sense. So now we get to the absolute core of bioethics, these 5 foundational principles. And you mentioned the tough part is often when they clash, right? Dilemmas usually come from conflicts between them.
Exactly. And it's crucial to understand that these 5 are usually considered prima facie principles.
Prima facie, meaning?
Meaning they apply in all cases unless an exception is warranted because they conflict with another principle that carries more weight in that specific situation. They aren't absolute rules with 0 exception.
Okay. Not absolute.
Think about a doctor. They have a prima facie duty to tell the truth. But let's say the patient is extremely fragile, and hearing a harsh truth might literally cause a fatal heart attack.
Oh.
In that case, the duty to promote the patient's welfare, another principle, might override the duty of truthfulness in that specific instance. It's a balancing act.
Okay, let's break down the big 5 then. Starting with number 1, autonomy.
Right. Autonomy is basically a person's rational capacity for self-governance, the ability to direct your own life, make your own choices.
Self-rule.
Exactly. It demands full respect for a person's intrinsic worth. And this is the foundation for informed consent in medicine. A choice isn't truly autonomous if you're making it based on ignorance or, worse, misinformation.
Makes sense. But autonomy isn't absolute either, right? There are limits.
Definitely. The most common limit is the harm principle. We can restrict someone's autonomy if their choices would cause harm to others.
Like quarantining someone with a highly contagious disease.
Precisely. Their freedom of movement is restricted to protect the community.
And then there's the other, maybe trickier restriction, paternalism.
Yeah, paternalism is overriding someone's choices or actions for their own good. The source makes a useful distinction here between weak paternalism and strong paternalism.
Okay.
Weak paternalism might be okay sometimes, like temporarily restraining a psychotic patient who's trying to seriously harm themselves. They aren't acting autonomously at that moment.
Right, their capacity is diminished.
But strong paternalism, that's usually seen as problematic.
Yeah.
This is overriding the choices of someone who is competent and rational.
Like the example of a doctor lying to a competent, terminally ill patient just to spare their feelings.
Exactly. That violates their right to make their own informed decisions about their own life based on the truth. It disrespects their autonomy.
Okay. Principle number 2, nonmalefcence. Sounds like do no harm.
That's the core of it.
Yeah.
Above all, do no harm. It means not intentionally or unintentionally inflicting harm on others.
But lots of medical treatments do cause harm, like side effects from drugs or pain from surgery.
True. So non-maleficence also requires due care. This means acting reasonably and responsibly to minimize harm or the chances of causing harm, especially when some harm might be unavoidable to achieve a greater good. You have to use the least harmful means necessary.
Got it. Minimize the damage. Third principle, benefcence.
This is the flip side of non-maleficence. It's about actively doing good for others, promoting their welfare, preventing or removing harm.
So more than just not hurting, it's actively helping.
Yes. Now, there's some philosophical debate about whether we all have a general duty to be actively beneficent to everyone, like strangers on the street. But within healthcare, beneficence is considered an absolutely obligatory and fundamental duty for professionals. It's part of the job description, really, to benefit the patient.
Okay, makes sense for doctors and nurses. Fourth principle, utility. This sounds like calculation.
It is, in a way. Utility requires us to produce the most favorable balance of good over bad, benefit over harm for everyone affected by the decision.
Maximizing the overall good.
That's the goal. This principle is so important because, let's face it, resources are often scarce. You frequently have to make tough trade-offs. Utility provides a way to think through those.
Can you give us a concrete example where that greatest good calculation gets really ethically challenging? The source mentioned mandatory immunization.
Yeah, that's a classic and often painful example. Think about it. If society mandates universal childhood vaccinations to prevent major outbreaks of diseases like measles or polio, we achieve enormous social benefit, right? Millions of lives saved or disabilities prevented. Massive beneficence on a societal scale.
Huge utility.
Huge utility. But we also know with statistical certainty that a very small number of children will have severe, perhaps fatal allergic reactions to the vaccine.
Oh, right. That's awful.
It is awful. But the principle of utility would likely argue for the mandatory program because the overall good achieved preventing widespread death and disease vastly outweighs the tragic but statistically rare harm to a few individuals. It's a stark example of utility potentially overriding other concerns, like individual autonomy or non-maleficence for those few.
Wow. Yeah, that's a tough one. Okay, and the fifth and final principle, justice.
Justice is about fairness. People getting what is fair, or what is their due. In bioethics, we're often focused specifically on distributive justice, meaning the fair distribution of society's benefits and burdens. Things like access to healthcare, medical resources, but also burdens like who bears the risks of research.
Okay, fairness and how things are shared out.
Exactly. The core idea is pretty simple. Equals should be treated equally. The catch, of course, is defining equals and what differences are morally relevant for treating people differently.
Right, back to that morally relevant difference idea.
And this is where different theories of justice really diverge. For instance, libertarian theories emphasize individual liberty, minimal government interference, and people acquiring resources through their own efforts.
So under that view, maybe universal health care isn't seen as a right the government should guarantee?
Generally, no. Libertarians often argue against mandatory, government-funded universal health care. On the other hand, you have egalitarian theories.
Egalitarian.
Equality. Right. They emphasize a more equal distribution of society's benefits, especially basic necessities like healthcare. Egalitarians might argue that ensuring everyone has access to a decent level of care is so important that it might justify restricting certain liberties, like imposing taxes to fund it. They'd likely support universal healthcare systems.
So very different conclusions based on how you prioritize liberty versus equality and distribution.
Exactly. Big conflict there.
Okay, so we have these 5 big principles: autonomy, non-maleficence, beneficence, utility, justice. They seem like solid objective standards. But then we run into the challenge of ethical relativism, right?
Yeah.
People who say, well, that's just your standard.
Right. Relativism pops up all the time. It's the idea that moral standards aren't objective or universal, but are relative to what individuals or cultures happen to believe.
And there are different flavors of it.
2 main forms discussed in the source. First is subjective relativism. This says moral standards are relative to the individual. Whatever you approve of is right for you.
That sounds problematic.
It really is. The major critique is that it implies individuals are morally infallible. If someone genuinely approves of, say, kicking puppies, then for them it's morally right, which seems absurd.
Yeah.
And it also makes genuine moral disagreement impossible. If I say X is wrong and you say X is right, we're not actually disagreeing about an objective truth. We're just stating our personal feelings, like saying, I like chocolate and I prefer vanilla. There's no argument to be had.
Okay, so subjective relativism seems pretty weak. What about the other form, cultural relativism?
This one's more common. It says moral standards are relative to the culture or society. What's right is whatever the culture approves of. The main argument for it usually points to the sheer diversity of moral beliefs and practices across different cultures.
Look, they do things differently there, so who are we to judge?
Exactly, that kind of reasoning. But logically, just because cultures disagree doesn't automatically mean there's no objective truth. Maybe some cultures are just wrong. More importantly, the source points out that many apparent cultural disagreements aren't actually about fundamental moral principles, but about differing non-moral beliefs about the facts of the world.
Like the example about the culture that kills elderly parents.
Right. The anthropological example of a culture that practices genocide, kindly killing elderly parents before they become frail to ensure they enter the afterlife strong, rather than weak and senile for eternity.
We'd obviously condemn the act.
Of course. But their underlying moral principle might be something we share. A duty to care for parents, a desire for their long-term well-being. The difference comes from their non-moral belief about how the afterlife works, not necessarily a fundamentally different morality about parental care.
Interesting distinction. Non-moral beliefs causing moral practice differences.
It happens a lot. And think about the consequences. If cultural relativism were true, it would mean cultures are morally infallible.
So you couldn't criticize the morality of, say, the Holocaust in Nazi Germany if the dominant culture at the time approved.
Logically, no. You couldn't legitimately criticize it from the outside. And it also makes the whole idea of moral progress incoherent. We can't say our standards today regarding, say, slavery or women's rights are better than those of the past. Just different. Which seems wrong.
Yeah, that doesn't sit right. Okay, what about the connection between ethics and religion? specifically the divine command theory.
Right, this comes up too. The divine command theory is the view that an action is morally right simply because God commands it. God's command makes it right. But this leads straight into a classic philosophical problem, often called Socrates' dilemma from Plato's dialogue Euthyphro. The question is, are actions right because God commands them? Or does God command them because they are, in themselves, right?
What's the difference?
Well, if you take the first option right because God commands it, then morality seems entirely arbitrary. God could command cruelty or murder, and those things would automatically become morally right just because God said so.
That seems unsettling.
Very. It makes morality dependent on potentially arbitrary commands. Because of this problem, most philosophers, and actually many religious thinkers too, reject the strict divine command theory.
So they take the second option, God commands things because they are right.
Yes. This suggests that morality is based on reasons or principles that are independent of God's will. God, being perfectly good and rational, recognizes what is right and commands it accordingly, but the rightness exists independently.
Now that means
It means morality is accessible through reason, whether you're religious or not. Both believers and non-believers can engage in ethical reasoning about what's right or wrong based on shared principles and logic.
okay. So if we're relying on reason, how do we actually do the work? How do we move from principles to making a case, constructing an argument?
Right, because the real work of ethics, of moral deliberation, is constructing and evaluating arguments. An argument isn't just shouting or trying to persuade someone with emotion.
Not just rhetoric.
No. An argument is a set of statements, premises offered as reasons to support another statement, the conclusion. It's an attempt at proof, or at least strong justification.
And there are different kinds of arguments.
Two main kinds relevant here. Deductive arguments aim for conclusive support. If the premises are true and the argument structure is valid, the conclusion must be true. It's logically airtight.
Like, all dogs are mammals. Rex is a dog, therefore Rex is a mammal.
Perfect example, airtight. Then you have inductive arguments. These aim for probable support. The premises make the conclusion likely, maybe even very likely, but not absolutely guaranteed.
Okay. Deductive for certainty, inductive for probability.
Generally, yes. And when we build a moral argument, there's a specific structure we need. You can't just jump from a factual statement is to a moral judgment ought.
Gim's guillotine, right?
Exactly. So a moral argument's conclusion, which is a moral statement, like action X is wrong, needs at least one moral premise, a general moral principle or standard, and at least one non-moral premise, a statement about facts or circumstances.
You need both the ought and the eyes in your premises.
You do. And arguments often go wrong when they rely on a shaky or often an unstated moral premise.
Like the example about in vitro fertilization.
Yeah, the argument might go, IVF is an unnatural process, therefore IVF should not be used. The conclusion should not be used is moral. The stated premise is unnatural is non-moral. A factual claim, arguably.
So what's missing?
The unstated moral premise. Any process that is unnatural should not be used, or anything unnatural is morally wrong.
And once you state that premise,
You immediately see it's questionable, right? We use unnatural things all the time. Vaccines, airplanes, clothing, eyeglasses, pacemakers. That hidden premise is likely false, or at least needs a lot more defense. Exposing it weakens the argument.
right, but sometimes the logic is fine, yet we still struggle with reasoning. The source talks about psychological roadblocks, right? Things that get in the way of clear thinking.
Oh, absolutely. These are the human biases and tendencies we all have to fight against. Super important to be aware of them. The first one is denying contrary evidence.
We don't like being wrong.
Nobody does. So we tend to apply way more scrutiny, be much more critical of evidence that contradicts what we already believe compared to evidence that supports our beliefs.
Like the studies on the death penalty they mentioned. People found flaws only in the study that disagreed with their stance.
Exactly. Classic example. Related to this is confirmation bias. This isn't just scrutinizing opposing views more harshly. It's actively seeking out and paying attention only to evidence that confirms what we already think.
Like looking only for white swans to prove all swans are white, instead of looking for the one black swan that would disprove it.
Perfect analogy. We search for confirmation, not necessarily for truth. Then there's motivated reasoning.
How's that different from confirmation bias?
It's related, but motivated reasoning is more about reasoning towards a desired conclusion. You start with the answer you want to be true, and then you build a case for it, cherry-picking evidence and arguments along the way. You're not trying to find the truth. You're trying to justify your pre-existing belief.
You see that online a lot with things like climate change or politics.
All the time. People construct elaborate arguments simply because they started with the conclusion they preferred. Next up is the availability error or heuristic.
Availability, meaning what's easy to recall.
Exactly. We tend to rely on evidence not because it's statistically sound or representative, but because it's vivid, memorable, or recent, easily available in our minds.
Like why people might fear flying more than driving, even though driving is statistically riskier.
Precisely. Dramatic news reports of plane crashes are very vivid and available in memory, whereas routine car travel isn't. Even though the cumulative risk is higher, our judgment gets skewed by what's mentally salient.
Okay, and the last one. This one's famous. The Dunning-Kruger effect.
Ah, yes, the Dunning-Kruger effect. This is essentially being ignorant of your own ignorance. It's the phenomenon where people who are least competent in a particular area often have the most inflated assessment of their own abilities.
The confident idiot syndrome, kind of.
Sort of, yes. They lack the expertise to even recognize their own mistakes or shortcomings. The crucial takeaway here is being aware that we all can fall prey to this. Humility about our own knowledge is the first step to guarding against it.
Wow, okay. That was incredibly thorough. We've really laid some essential groundwork here. We've clarified the basic vocabulary in morality, ethics, bioethics, the different branches.
Right.
We've detailed those 5 crucial prima facie principles: autonomy, nonmalefcence, beneficence, utility, and justice.
The core toolkit.
And we've armed ourselves, hopefully, with an understanding of critical reasoning, how moral arguments work, and, perhaps most importantly, an awareness of those psychological pitfalls that can trip us up.
That's the whole package from this foundational chapter. It's the framework needed to even begin analyzing the really complex issues we mentioned at the start.
So bringing it back to the big picture, what does all this mean? It means when we face these incredibly tough emotional questions like how to allocate scarce organs or the ethics of surrogacy or genetic interventions,
Yeah.
it means we're not just having a disagreement based on feelings. We are, or we should be, trying to balance these fundamental principles: autonomy versus beneficence, utility versus justice, which often pull in different directions. That's where the real ethical tension lies.
Beautifully put. And that leads perfectly into a final provocative thought for you, our listener, to maybe chew on.
Okay, leave us with something to think about.
Consider experimental, potentially life-saving treatments that are often incredibly expensive or resource-intensive. When deciding who gets access, where should we draw the line? Should our primary guide be the principle of utility, trying to maximize the total number of lives saved or life years gained, even if it means prioritizing those most likely to benefit?
The greatest good for the greatest number.
Right. Or should we prioritize egalitarian justice, ensuring everyone has a fair opportunity for access, regardless of their statistical chances of success or the cost involved, even if it means fewer lives are saved overall?
Wow. Utility versus fair opportunity.
That tension, that need to weigh those competing values, that's not just a hypothetical. That's the beating heart of real-world bioethics. There often isn't one easy answer.
Definitely food for thought. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this gives you a solid foundation. We'll see you next time.